Listen to a conversation between a student and the faculty advisor of the campus newspaper.
Hi, I talked to someone on the phone a couple weeks ago. Anna, I think it was?
I'm Anna, the faculty advisor.
Oh, great. I'm Peter Murphy. You probably don't remember me, but...
No, I remember you. You were interested in working for the paper.
Yeah, as a reporter.
That's right. You're taking a journalism class, and you've done some reporting before in high school, right?
Wow, you have a good memory.
Well, we haven't had many students applying lately. So anyway, you still want to do some reporting for us?
Yeah, if you have room for me on the staff.
Well, we always need more reporters. But you know we don't pay anything, right?
Yeah, I know, but I'd like the experience. It would look good on my resume.
Absolutely. Let's see. I think I told you that we asked prospective reporters to turn in some outlines for possible articles.
Yeah, I sent them in about a week ago, but I haven't heard anything back yet, so I thought I'd stop by and see. But I guess you haven't looked at them yet.
Oh, Max, the news editor, he looks at all the submissions.
Oh, so he hasn't made any decision about me yet?
Well, I just got here a few minutes ago. I haven't been in for a couple of days. Just give me a second to check my email. Here's a message from Max. Let's see. Well, it seems you've really impressed him. He says it'd be wonderful if you could join our staff.
Oh, great. When can I start?
Well, you turned in an outline on something to do with the physics department?
Yeah, they're trying to come up with ways to get more students to take their introductory courses.
Right. Well, apparently nobody else is covering that story, so he wants you to follow up on it.
Okay. What about the other outline I sent in? About the proposed increase in tuition fees?
Oh, it looks like we've got that covered.
So I'm starting with an article about the physics department. I guess I'd better get to work. Do you have any advice on how I should cover the story?
Well, Max will want to talk to you, but I'm sure he'll tell you to find out things like why the physics department's worried about enrollment. Has the number of students been getting smaller in recent years? By how much? What kinds of plans are they considering to address this problem?
Right. Some of those issues are already in what I proposed.
And you'll want to do some interviews. You know, what do the professors think of the plans? What do the students think? You get the idea, but...
But wait till I talk to Max before proceeding.
Right. He'll cover everything you need to know to be a reporter for us. Can you come back this afternoon? He'll be here until 5 o'clock.
Why does the student go to the campus newspaper office? Why does the student want to write for the campus newspaper? The student mentions the proposed tuition increase as a possible topic for the newspaper. What does the advisor imply about the topic? What will the student write about in his first article for the newspaper? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I think I told you that we asked prospective reporters to turn in some outlines for possible articles.
Yeah, I sent them in about a week ago, but I haven't heard anything back yet, so I thought I'd stop by and see. But I guess you haven't looked at them yet.
Oh, Max, the news editor, he looks at all the submissions.
What does the advisor imply when she says this?
Oh, Max, the news editor, he looks at all the submissions.
Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
For decades, psychologists have been looking at our ability to perform tasks while other things are going on, how we're able to keep from being distracted, and what the conditions for good concentration are. As long ago as 1982, researchers came up with something called the CFQ, the Cognitive Failures Questionnaire. This questionnaire asks people to rate themselves according to how often they get distracted in different situations, like forgetting to save a computer file because they had something else on their mind, or missing a speed limit sign on the road. John?
I've lost my share of computer files, but not because I'm easily distracted. I just forget to save them.
And that's part of the problem with the CFQ. It doesn't take other factors into account enough, like forgetfulness. Plus, you really can't say you're getting objective scientific results from a subjective questionnaire where people report on themselves. So it's no surprise that someone attempted to design an objective way to measure distraction. It's a simple computer game designed by a psychologist named Nilly Levy. In Levy's game, people watch as the letters N and X appear and disappear in a certain area on the computer screen. Every time they see an N, they press one key, and every time they see an X, they press another. Except other letters also start appearing in the surrounding area of the screen with increasing frequency, which creates a distraction and makes the task more difficult. Levy observed that people's reaction time slowed as these distractions increased.
Well, that's not too surprising, is it?
No, it's not. It's the next part of the experiment that was surprising. When the difficulty really increased, when the screen filled up with letters, people got better at spotting the X's and N's. Why do you think that happened?
Well, maybe when we're really concentrating, we just don't perceive irrelevant information. Maybe we just don't take it in, you know?
Yes, and that's one of the hypotheses that was proposed, that the brain simply doesn't admit the unimportant information. The second hypothesis is that, yes, we do perceive everything, but the brain categorizes the information, and whatever's not relevant to what we're concentrating on gets treated as low priority. So Levy did another experiment designed to look at this ability to concentrate better in the face of increased difficulty. This time, she used brain scanning equipment to monitor activity in a certain part of the brain, the area called V5, which is part of the visual cortex, the part of our brains that processes visual stimuli. V5 is the area of the visual cortex that's responsible for the sensation of movement. Once again, Levy gave people a computer-based task to do. They had to distinguish between words in upper and lowercase letters, or, even harder, they had to count the number of syllables in different words. This time, the distraction was a moving star field in the background. You know, where it looks like you're moving through space, passing stars. Normally, area V5 would be stimulated as those moving stars are perceived, and sure enough, Levy found that during the task, area V5 was active, so people were aware of the moving star field. That means people were not blocking out the distraction.
So, doesn't that mean that the first hypothesis you mentioned was wrong? The one that says we don't even perceive irrelevant information when we're concentrating?
Yes, that's right. Up to a point. But that's not all. Levy also discovered that as she made the task more difficult, V5 became less active. So that means that now people weren't really noticing the star field at all. That was quite a surprise, and it proved that the second hypothesis, that we do perceive everything all the time, but the brain categorizes distractions differently, well, that wasn't true either. Levy thinks the solution lies in the brain's ability to accept or ignore visual information. She thinks its capacity is limited. It's like a highway. When there are too many cars, traffic is stopped. No one can get on. So when the brain is loaded to capacity, no new distractions can be perceived. Now, that may be the correct conclusion for visual distractions, but more research is needed to tell us how the brain deals with, say, the distractions of solving a math problem when we're hungry, or when someone is singing in the next room.
What is the lecture mainly about? According to the professor, what are two weaknesses of the cognitive failures questionnaire? What hypotheses about distraction and the brain were Levy's experiments involving star fields designed to investigate? What did Levy's scans of subjects' visual cortexes reveal? Why does the professor mention a highway? What is the professor's opinion of Levy's work?
Listen to part of a conversation between a student and her biology professor.
Hi, Samantha. How did your track meet go?
Great! I placed first in one race and third in another.
Congratulations. You must practice a lot.
3 times a week pre-season, but now that we're competing every weekend, we practice 6 days a week from 3:30 till 5.
Athletics place a heavy demand on your time, don't they?
Yeah, but I really love competing, so...
You know, I played soccer in college, and my biggest challenge, and I didn't always succeed, was getting my studying in during soccer season. Are you having a similar...
No, I really do make time to study, and I actually study more for this class than I do for all my other classes. But I didn't see the grade I expected on my midterm exam, which is why I came by.
Well, you didn't do badly on the exam, but I agree it did not reflect your potential. I say this because your work on the lab project was exemplary. I was so impressed with the way you handled the microscope and the samples of onion cells, and with how carefully you observed and diagrammed and interpreted each stage of cell division. And I don't think you could have done that if you hadn't read and understood the chapter. I mean, it seemed like you really had a good understanding of it.
I thought so too, but I missed some questions about cell division on the exam.
So, what happened?
I just sort of blanked out, I guess. I had a hard time remembering details. It was so frustrating.
All right, let's back up. You say you studied. Where? At home?
At my kitchen table, actually.
And that's supposed to be a quiet environment?
Not exactly. My brother and parents try to keep it down when I'm studying, but the phone pretty much rings off the hook, so...
So you might try a place with fewer distractions, like the library.
But the library closes at midnight, and I like to study all night before a test. You know, so everything's fresh in my mind. I studied 6 straight hours the night before the midterm exam. That's why I expected to do so much better.
Oh, okay. You know that studying 6 consecutive hours is not equivalent to studying 1 hour a day for 6 days.
It isn't?
No, there's research that shows that after about an hour of intense focus, your brain needs a break. It needs to, shift gears a little. Your brain's ability to absorb information starts to decline after about the first hour. So if you're dealing with a lot of new concepts and vocabulary, anyway, if you just reviewed your notes even 20 minutes a day, it'd be much better than waiting until the night before an exam to try and absorb all those details.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Think of your brain as a muscle. If you didn't practice regularly with your track team, and then tried to squeeze in 3 weeks' worth of running practice the day before a track meet, how well do you think you'd perform in your races?
Why does the woman go to see her professor? What does the professor imply when he mentions his experience playing soccer in college? What did the woman study in her laboratory project? What does the professor say about the results of the brain research? At the end of the conversation, Why does the professor return to the topic of running on the track team? Listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
Now in Europe, in the Middle Ages, before the invention of printing and the printing press, all books, all manuscripts were handmade, and the material typically used for the pages was parchment, which is animal skin that's stretched and dried under tension so it becomes really flat and can be written on. During the 1400s, when printing was being developed, paper became the predominant material for books in Europe, but prior to that, it was parchment. Parchment is durable, much more so than paper, and it could be reused, which came in handy since it was a costly material and in short supply. So it wasn't uncommon for the scribes or monks who produced the manuscripts. Remember, before printing, books were made mainly in monasteries. Well, the scribes often recycled the parchment that had been used for earlier manuscripts. They simply erased the ink off the parchment and wrote something new in its place. A manuscript page that was written on, erased, and then used again is called a palimpsest. Palimpsests were created, well, we know about two methods that were used for removing ink from parchment. In the late Middle Ages, it was customary to scrape away the surface of the parchment with an abrasive, which completely wiped out any writing that was there. But earlier in the Middle Ages, the original ink was usually removed by washing the used parchment with milk. That removed the ink, but with the passing of time, the original writing might reappear. In fact, it might reappear to the extent that scholars could make out and even decipher the original text. Perhaps the most famous example is the Archimedes palimpsest. Archimedes lived in Greece around 200 BCE, and as you probably know, he's considered one of the greatest mathematicians who ever lived, even though many of his writings had been lost, including what many now think to be his most important work, called the Method. But in 1998, a book of prayers from the Middle Ages sold in an art auction for a lot of money, more money than anyone would pay for a damaged book from the 12th century. Beautiful or not. Why? It had been discovered that the book was a palimpsest, and beneath the surface writing of the manuscript lay, guess what? Mathematical theorems and diagrams from Archimedes. Archimedes' writings were originally done on papyrus scrolls. Then, in the 10th century, a scribe made a copy on parchment of some of his texts and diagrams, including, as it turns out, the Method. This was extremely fortunate, since later on, the original papyrus scrolls disappeared. About 200 years later, in the 12th century, this parchment manuscript became a palimpsest when a scribe used the parchment to make a prayer book. So the pages, the pieces of parchment themselves, had been preserved, but the Archimedes text was erased and written over, and no one knew it existed. It wasn't until 1906 that a scholar came across the prayer book in a library and realized it was a palimpsest, and that the underlying layer of text could only have come from Archimedes. That was when his work, The Method, was discovered for the first time. The palimpsest then went through some more tough times, but eventually it ended up in an art auction where it was bought and then donated to an art museum in Baltimore for conservation and study. To avoid further damage to the manuscripts, the research team at the art museum has had to be extremely selective in the techniques they use to see the original writing. They've used ultraviolet light and some other techniques, and if you're interested in that sort of thing, you can learn more about it in an art conservation class. But actually, it was a physicist who came up with the method that was a breakthrough. He realized that the iron in the ancient ink would display if exposed to a certain X-ray imaging method. And except for small portions of the text that couldn't be deciphered, this technique's been very helpful in seeing Archimedes' texts and drawings through the medieval overwriting.
What is the lecture mainly about? What are 2 points the professor makes about parchment? What does the professor imply when he explains the washing and scraping methods that were used to remove ink from a parchment surface? What type of book became known as the Archimedes palimpsest? What does the professor imply about the various techniques used to view Archimedes' text? What does the professor imply about the significance of the Archimedes palimpsest? Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, we've been talking till now about the 2 basic needs of a biological community: an energy source to produce organic materials, food for the organisms, and the waste recycling or breakdown of materials back into inorganic molecules, and about how all this requires photosynthesis, when green plants or microbes convert sunlight into energy, and also requires microorganisms, bacteria, to secrete chemicals that break down or recycle the organic material to complete the cycle. So, now we're done with this chapter of the textbook, we can just review for the weekly quiz and move on to the next chapter, right? Well, not so fast. First, I'd like to talk about some discoveries that have challenged one of these fundamental assumptions about what you need in order to have a biological community. And, well, there actually were quite a few surprises. It all began in 1977 with the exploration of hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Hydrothermal vents are cracks in the Earth's surface that occur, well, the ones we're talking about here are found deep at the bottom of the ocean. And these vents on the ocean floor, they release this incredibly hot water, 3 to 4 times the temperature that you'd boil water at, because this water is being heated deep within the Earth. Well, about 30 years ago, researchers sent a deep-sea vessel to explore the ocean's depths, about 3 kilometers down, way deep, to the ocean floor. No one had ever explored that far down before. Nobody expected there to be any life down there because of the conditions. And first of all, sunlight doesn't reach that far down, so it's totally dark. There couldn't be any plant or animal life since there's no sunlight, no source of energy to make food. If there was any life at all, it'd just be some bacteria breaking down any dead materials that might have fallen to the bottom of the ocean. And
what about the water pressure? Didn't we talk before about how the deeper down into the ocean you go, the greater the pressure?
Excellent point. And not only the extreme pressure, but also the extreme temperature of the water around these vents. If the lack of sunlight didn't rule out the existence of a biological community down there, then these factors certainly would. Or so they thought.
So you're telling us they did find organisms that could live under those conditions?
They did indeed. Something like 300 different species.
But how could that be? I mean, without sunlight, no energy, no...
What they discovered was that microorganisms, bacteria, had taken over both functions of the biological community, the recycling of waste materials and the production of energy. They were the energy source. You see, it turns out that certain microorganisms are chemosynthetic. They don't need sunlight because they take their energy from chemical reactions. So, as I said, unlike green plants, which are photosynthetic and get their energy from sunlight, these bacteria that they found at the ocean floor, these are chemosynthetic, which means that they get their energy from chemical reactions. How does this work? As we said, these hydrothermal vents are releasing into the ocean depths this intensely hot water. And here's the thing. This hot water contains a chemical called hydrogen sulfide and also a gas, carbon dioxide. Now, these bacteria actually combine the hydrogen sulfide with the carbon dioxide, and this chemical reaction is what produces organic material, which is the food for larger organisms. The researchers had never seen anything like it before.
Wow. So just add a chemical to a gas and bingo, you've got a food supply?
Not just that. What was even more surprising were all the large organisms that lived down there. The most distinctive of these was something called the tube worm. Here, let me show you a picture. The tube of the tube worm is really, really long. They can be up to 1.5 meters long. And these tubes are attached to the ocean floor. Pretty weird looking, huh? And another thing, the tube worm has no mouth or digestive organs. So you're asking, how does it eat? Well, they have these special organs that collect the hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide and then transfer it to another organ, where billions of bacteria live. These bacteria that live inside the tube worms provide them with hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide, and the bacteria kind of feed the tube worms through chemosynthesis. Remember? That chemical reaction I described earlier.
Why does the professor discuss the exploration of hydrothermal vents? What are three of the conditions of water near hydrothermal vents that made researchers think they would not find living organisms there? What does the professor imply about the researchers' reaction to the biological community discovered on the ocean floor? According to the professor, what is the role of chemosynthesis in biological communities that are found near hydrothermal vents? Why does the professor mention the bacteria that live inside a tube worm? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
So, now we're done with this chapter of the textbook. We can just review for the weekly quiz and move on to the next chapter, right? Well, not so fast.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
Not so fast.